tutorial, you will learn how to make a large-scale Sandstorm effect using Blender, which is something inspired from the movie Dune that I am sure you watched recently. The particular thing about this tutorial is that I'm not gonna make any tedious, time-consuming smoke simulation process, nothing like that. Instead, I will make it procedurally, which means that you can make this in 15 minutes and you have control in real time over it. In the past, I actually made other experiments with procedural volumes, but the big difference is that I was using millions of vertices. Instead, in this tutorial, we actually just need one simple cube, which means 8 vertices, which is absolutely crazy. Before starting, consider joining my Patreon, in which you can find regularly posted tutorials like this about visual effects and stuff. You can support this channel, and you can also download some files, for example, the original file of this tutorial. Alright, Blender 4.1. I'm gonna move the light and the camera out of the way like that because I want to scale this cube a lot. If you press N, you can see these dimensions here. I want all of this to be 10 meters, and the Y dimension, I want to set this on 60 meters. If you want to do the same, so I'm gonna press Ctrl A and apply scale. Next, I'm gonna animate the position of this cube. So on frame 1, I'm gonna press I. And in this new version of Blender, it automatically adds a keyframe like that. I'm gonna go in the last frame of the timeline here. I'm gonna move this cube a little bit forward like this, and I'm gonna press I again to add another keyframe. Next, in the timeline, I'm gonna press A to select all the keyframes and then press T, and I'm gonna choose linear. This way, we get an animation like this that has a constant speed. Perfect. Well, this tutorial applies in cycles. Eevee requires completely different settings in my experiments, so I'm gonna focus only on cycles for this tutorial, otherwise the algorithm of YouTube will punish me. Now, I'm gonna create a new window. So this window here is gonna be my shader editor. So here I'm gonna stay in render preview. I'm gonna need the Node Wrangler add-on for this tutorial, so edit, preferences, add-ons. I'm gonna search for Node Wrangler, just ensure that this checkbox is active and click on Save Preferences, because we're gonna need it a lot. So in case you're wondering if your computer is not strong enough for making a Sandstorm effect, don't worry, I'm gonna show you also how to handle volumes even if you have a weak computer. So first thing, I'm gonna delete this principal BSDF from here. I'm gonna replace it with a principal volume, this one here. I'm gonna plug it into the volume. We need more light, so I'm gonna change this light to some sun with a power of 7 maybe. So I'm gonna go on working with my volumetric cube. I'm gonna change the color already to something similar to the sand. So every time I add a new node, I press Shift A and click on search, alright? Gradient, texture. I'm gonna change the gradient texture to quadratic sphere. I'm gonna plug the color into the density. Then to control better the density of the smoke, I'm gonna add a math node. I change it to multiply. I'm gonna move it in the line here until it automatically connects here. I'm gonna increase this multiply value and you can see that I am controlling the density basically. I'm gonna set this on 500 for now, but we're gonna change it later. So you can see that we are kinda having a sphere inside this cube. We're gonna need to reposition this sphere. So thanks to the Node Wrangler add-on, if you select this gradient texture node, if you press Ctrl T, these two new nodes will appear. We're going to ensure that the texture coordinate is set on generated, and basically with these location values we can control the position of this sphere. You can see that I'm trying my best to put it in the center, and for now it's very big, so if you drag these 3 values of the scale, holding shift you can have a more precise control and basically go on tweaking these values until the sphere is staying in the center of the cube, more or less. It's not very important for now because, by the way, we're going to change these values a lot during this tutorial, so something more or less like that. You can see that I am getting a sphere flying inside the cube like that. For now it's pretty okay. After that I want to add a lot of small details. For doing that I'm gonna add a noise texture. I'm gonna change the noise texture to 4D because this way we have this W value that is very useful for the animation, but I'm gonna show you later. Next I'm gonna connect the color into the scale. The smoke will temporarily disappear for now, but don't worry for that. I'm gonna need also a color ramp for controlling better the shape of these little details. Also, to control better the shape of the entire Sandstorm, we're gonna add a combine XYZ node, this one here. I'm gonna plug it in here. And before this, I'm gonna add also another math node. I'm gonna plug it before the combine node. So these two nodes are basically for controlling the shape of the entire Sandstorm. Sandstorm. I want to control in one click the X dimension and the Z dimension. So for this reason, I'm going to connect this node also in here. And basically, if you tweak this Y dimension, you can see that I'm stretching the shape on the Y axis like that. I'm going to right click on this node, rename, just for you to understand, combine shape stretching, just so that you understand what we are doing. And instead, this add node is for controlling the scale on the Z and in the X dimensions, like this. For now, I'm gonna set it on 2.2, let's say, and instead for this one here, I'm gonna try my best to just basically have this shape in the center. So I'm gonna plug this generated into the vector of the noise tester here, which is pretty important. Yeah, so for now, the setup is like that if you want to check it, but keep in mind that we're gonna change this value multiple times, basically. So now we can tweak this color ramp a little bit in order to basically sculpt the shape of this sandstorm. You can see that I am basically controlling how it's gonna look. Yeah, you can see that it's kind of stretched also, in some sense, in this horizontal dimension. So for this reason, I'm gonna add a mapping node before the noise texture, like here, and I'm gonna tweak the scale value a lot until it becomes more evenly distributed like that. So this noise texture here is for the small details. So I'm gonna right click, rename noise, small details. Speaking of which, I'm gonna increase the details value a lot to the maximum. I'm going to increase also the roughness value to something like 0.8. You can see that I'm getting a lot of small details. It's convenient to also rotate the light in order to see better these little details. Now we want this smoke to look really large scale, because for now it's looking like just a little cloud. So if you go in the material settings here, under settings, I'm going to change this step rate to 0.1. And you can see that now this is making a big difference. It's basically looking really large scale, but this is unfortunately taking longer render times, you can see. So eventually, if you have a weak computer, you can set the step rate on 0.3, which is going to look a little bit fluffy, but is okay. I'm going to work with a step rate value of 0.1. Now is a good moment for setting up all my render settings. So yeah, on cycles, these are the render settings that I recommend to use for having at the same time the best quality of your smoke and also reasonable render times and avoiding completely the noise in your render as well. I have added a floor perfectly intersecting the smoke in the middle. Now, if you want to check the node setup, for now looks like this. I'm gonna make some adjustments. So first of all, in the color ramp, if you select the white color stop, if you click in this color here, I want this to be not completely white, but a little bit gray, like something around here. This way we can basically push the shape a little bit more like that. So something like here, I would say not completely white, basically. Then I want to add more variety, we can say, to this shape. So if we make some space here, we can basically duplicate the noise texture and the color ramp as well. So Shift D, and basically we're gonna need to connect the mapping node to the vector. I'm gonna rename this new noise texture, right click and rename it noise big waves. Another thing that I wanna do in the mapping node, I'm gonna rename this mapping texture stretching and rotation, just for you to don't get confused. The reason for this name is because we are gonna animate the rotation like that, and you can see that I am basically emulating the dynamics of a sandstorm, which is fantastic. Also, we can control the stretching of the texture from this value here. By the way, don't worry for that for now. I just want to connect these nodes here. If you hold Control and Shift, or for Macintosh, Command and Shift, and right click and drag a line from here to here, you will see that a new node has appeared here, which is the mix node. I'm gonna make some space in order to introduce this mix node here, expand it. And you can see that now we have two noise textures combined together here, but the first color ramp should not be connected in here. But if you take it and actually change this position to the factor of this node. And the last thing I want to do is to change this color to a completely white color, like this. We are basically cutting the shape even more. For now it's just looking like a perfect smooth piece of bread that I can eat, but for the noise small details I want to increase the scale a lot. Like I'm gonna set 21 in the scale value here, and this is for the small details. Instead, for the noise big waves, I'm gonna decrease the scale value. Like I'm gonna set 1.5, which is fantastic. And once we tweak this color ramp a little bit, let's see if I can get it right. I'm gonna spend some moments to actually just play randomly with this color ramp until they do basically what I expect to see in my Sandstorm. Something like that. Well, for the big waves noise, we don't want all these details, right? I'm gonna decrease the details to 2. Because I just want some large-scale big waves, we can say. The node setup for now is looking like this if you want to check it, but we're gonna make some adjustments. So it's time to animate. So first of all, when it comes to animating, the main issue is that Blender is pretty slow. Like if you play the animation, you don't have really a real-time response. So the easiest way to have a real-time feedback on how fast or slow the cloud is moving is to do this. Basically, I'm gonna take it from here, this node here. If you click and drag a line from here and connect it to the surface of the material, the shader will temporarily show you the texture in the surface of this object, which is fantastic because if you press play, you can see that now Blender is going in real time. So we can temporarily visualize the texture when we are working on the animation. And whenever you want to go back visualizing your smoke, you can simply take this line from the surface and drop it away from here, like that, and boom, you are watching your smoke again. So for now, let's actually connect this to the surface. Yeah, there are some shortcuts for doing this more conveniently, but I don't want to confuse you. So basically, to animate this smoke, we're gonna do 2 things. If we go in this mapping node for the stretching and for the rotation, I'm gonna animate this value here for the Y rotation. Ensure that you're on frame 1, and in the Y rotation value, I'm gonna write exactly this. Don't worry, just copy and paste. Hashtag frame multiplied 0.005. And this is basically making a driver for us, which means that once you play the animation, you can see that this number is constantly increasing automatically for us. And you can see this rotation happening, which is fantastic. If you want a faster rotation, just go on frame 1, just edit this driver by clicking here basically, and you can simply put a higher number like 0.00, let's try 8. Then if you play the animation, you can see that now it's going a little bit faster. And this is a fantastic way for having a real-time feedback. Now, you can notice another thing. Basically, this is rotating, which is fantastic, but it's looking a little bit like a stationary object rotating like that, pretty solid. We want the shape to change, to add variety, like the smoke does in real life. So to do that, in addition to this driver, we're gonna animate also this W value for the noise, small details basically. So let's go on frame 1 and let's do the same thing, but with a different number. So W value, I'm gonna write hashtag frame multiplied. This time I'm gonna set a lower number, like 0.0009 for the W value, and for the rotation instead is 0.008. You can see that now is rotating the entire shape, and also the general shape of the smoke is constantly randomizing these little details, which is amazing. If you want, you can do the exact same thing also in the W value of the big waves, why not? So let's go on frame 1. And I'm gonna set something very low, like hashtag frame multiplied 0.000, and I set this on 3. Because this is gonna change really fast, right? Yeah, you can definitely tell that the shape is constantly changing. Let's try to visualize the final smoke. So I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna take this line and drop it away from here, and let's try to play the animation. If it's not terribly slow, yeah, you can see that my smoke is kinda traveling on the floor. If you want a faster response, you can also go in the material settings on the shader here, under settings. I'm gonna change the step rate temporarily to 0.3. You can see that is back at looking bad. It's just for a temporary faster response. Now you can see that we have a nice rolling sandstorm. Cool. Probably is rolling too fast. Large scale stuff is supposed to move very slow. Yeah, by the way, look at that. I'm gonna reset the step rate to 0.1. At this point, it's just a matter of tweaking and tweaking all the values and color ramps until basically it looks like you expect. But this is already pretty decent. So, if you want to check, this is the final shader setup. If you want this sandstorm to look really dense, I'm gonna really boost this multiply node to something really crazy like 50 millions. And this is finally looking like a large-scale smoke. This is completely procedural, which means that you can adjust this entire sandstorm whenever you want. If you want to make it smaller like that, You can scale this cube perfectly whenever you want. And then just remember that in the shader, you're going to have to adjust the stretching in here. So texture stretching, I'm going to decrease this value easy like that. Normally, with smoke simulations, making this adjustment would require every time hours for just one change, which is why making a procedural workflow like this is much more convenient. So yeah, this is how I would make a procedural Sandstorm using Blender. Consider joining my Patreon if you want to enjoy your learning process with me. Thanks for watching and see you next time!